remind members they should send their speaking notes by email to hansardnotes, all one word, @parliament.uk, and the electronic devices should be switched to silent. Tea and coffee are not allowed during sittings. There is water for a water bill appropriately. Okay, new clause 27. We now come to new clause 27, which has already been debated. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 27 formally.
Environmental duties with respect to national parks.
Okay, so we're going to vote. The question is that new clause 27 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division! Lock the doors! They've sufficiently locked, no one's coming in. Okay.
Dan Aldridge. No. Helena Dollimore. No. Tim Farron. No. Catherine Fuchs. No. Amanda Hack. No. Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Jerome Mayhew. No. Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffy.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No vote.
And Jeff Smith.
No.
Okay, the scores on the doors. The noes were 3.
So the ayes were back.
Oh, sorry, the ayes were 3. I haven't got my reading glasses. The ayes were 3, the noes were 10. So the noes have it, the noes have it. We now come to clause 28. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 28. Oh, sorry, in fact.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to you and to everyone. So, new clause 28. I'm going to highlight the two key points I really want to highlight here, which is this is about when companies go into special administration, what happens when they come out of special administration. And para 1, the part I'm going to highlight is this: to consider the merits of changing the law to provide that a water company exiting a special administration regime becomes a company mutually owned by its customers. And then further down in para 2, to consider the general merits of mutual ownership of water companies in such circumstances and what model of mutual ownership would be most suitable. You'll see that we're not saying it has to be this or that, we're just advocating considering this. Why would we consider this? Because private companies have made an absolute mess of our water sector. They have added no value over the last 36 years. They have ramped up nearly £70 billion worth of debt. And we have an opportunity, when these companies come out of special administration, to do something different and not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And what I'm looking for today from each of you is to consider that so that you take that on board. We're not asking for agreement, it's just asking for consideration. Yes? Because I think you all know how badly these private companies have treated us, our rivers, and our communities. So, I'd also restate that these are monopolies, yeah? So they have absolute power, and unfortunately our regulators have completely failed in their task. Yes? And so if they have failed in this task, and if we do not have absolute confidence, which I don't think anybody in the room who is voting today does have absolute confidence in these regulators, do not give it back to them. Do not give it back to the private sector. Okay? And this is standard. This is standard globally. This is what the rest of the world does with its water sector. Yeah? Even places like the US, the vast majority of the water sector in the US is mutually held or municipally held. So Chile may be one country we can point to in the world, a shining example of private capitalism that does this, but almost every other country in the world does not do this. So we are really asking you to just do what is standard rather than what is unusual. And I would also kind of state that I think your Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State, Minister for Services, Small Business and Exports, has himself written about the benefits of mutual ownership model. And I quote, which would force water companies to operate in the interests of consumers, where environmental considerations such as disposal of sewage would take precedence over profit. So that's what our request is here. I rest my case.
Would the honourable member give way?
Well, absolutely.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for raising this point, because we've had a situation for several decades where the water companies have been able to profit from failure. And my experience is there's a strong groundswell of opinion in the public from across political persuasions that they want to see real action taken. And if there has been real failure, for water companies not to just be allowed to carry on operating in the private sector. So I welcome the member's amendment, and mutual ownership is clearly one alternative model. Would he also agree that full public ownership is another option that should be investigated in these circumstances?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. What I really like about this proposal is these are companies coming out of special administration, so it doesn't cost anybody anything. Yeah? So the equity of these shareholders has been written off. Yeah? So one of the reasons why we often hear this wouldn't be a good idea is, well, it will cost too much money, we'd have to buy these companies out. You don't need to buy these companies out. We're advocating this only in the case where companies are going into special administration. So we're advocating here a mutual model, and only that, respectfully. So that's what we're advocating, and that's on the table is today. So that's what we're after.
Would the honourable member give way?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Chair. Would the honourable member agree that it's lucky that, in fact, we are going into a review, the Cunliffe review, within 6 months, where we will be looking at great depth in ownership, regulation, everything to do with the water industry. So maybe this is something that we could take further at that stage.
Well, I thank my honourable member for intervening on that. And maybe that's a chink of light. Because so far all I've heard from the government is it's private companies only, welcome here. So if indeed, and my understanding is the Cunliffe review, it has purposely, the remit of that review has purposely excluded ownership. Now if that is now on the table, great news, because I think it really is one of the fundamental problems of the water sector. So if that is the case, that the Commission's remit now includes ownership structures, and I would love the Minister to clarify on that, I'd be delighted. Thank you.
Independent review, companies exiting a special administration regime.
The question is that new clause 28 be read a second time. Minister Emma Hardy.
Thank you very much, and once again it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And just to highlight to members of the committee, as promised, I've provided a fact sheet on the use of special administration, which is available on the table, and all of you should have received it via email, but there's a hard copy just there as well for your convenience. And welcome to the last day of committee.
Would you mind, on that point, may I intervene?
On the welcoming point, of course.
No. So, well, I thank you, and we all welcome each other. But actually, it was on the point about the note, because I think if you're highlighting the note, I think it's very important that I really appreciate you going to the trouble. Thank you, team, as well, for going to the trouble of putting it together. But I've read it diligently and done my best. But a quiz question for you, because at the top, the first bullet says this: gives the power to recover HMG funding should there not be sufficient funds to pay HMG back at the end of SAR. Then you go down to the context paragraph, and you go to the second bullet up from the bottom of that paragraph, and it says this: if this shortfall occurred and ministers decided to use this power, the Secretary of State and Welsh ministers must launch a consultation prior to this power being used. This will ensure that those affected, e.g. water bill payers, are able to provide their views. It will also ensure that the shortfall recovery mechanism is implemented in a way that means costs are recovered fairly. To me, that completely confirms what was in the explanatory notes of DEFRA's number 69, which says that the bill payers are going to be made to pay by the government here for their costs, as opposed to the creditors. Please confirm if you could.
If the Minister could not use, we don't use the word use. Minister!
Thank you. And at the risk of having the same debate over and over again, I refer the Honourable Member to the last page of the fact sheet that we've produced, and I'm not quite sure how clearer we can make it. The question, would the shortfall recovery mechanism be used to compensate financial creditors or shareholders following a SAR? The answer is no. I then go on to say, after the word no, the shortfall recovery mechanism could only be used to recover a government shortfall in the unlikely event of a SAR. So back to welcoming everybody to the last day of committee, and thank everyone for their contributions and for taking part in this. If I don't have the opportunity to say it again later, thank you all very much. And especially thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for tabling another new clause, 28. A special administration regime, as I have said, enables a company which provides vital public services, for example, water, energy or rail, to be put into administration in certain circumstances. During a SAR, a court-appointed special administrator takes over the affairs of the business. They are appointed by and answerable to the court. The court-appointed special administrator's statutory objectives, which are set out in legislation, are twofold: to continue running of the company to meet its statutory functions until such a time that it is possible to rescue the company, for example via a debt restructure, or to transfer, for example, sell a company to new owners. There is nothing to prevent the company or parts of it from being transferred as a going concern to mutual ownership by a company's customers, should the special administrator deem this to be appropriate. Although, in an insolvency scenario, the special administrator's primary purpose is to rescue the company as a going concern, mutual ownership could be an option following a SAR, provided the organisation in question had sufficient funds and could ensure that the company or parts of it could continue to properly carry out its activities relating to water. Although, in an insolvency scenario, the special administrator's primary purpose is to rescue the company as a going concern, as I've said, mutual ownership could be an option. Yes.
Kind of just confirm that, I think. So I wanted to just clarify, we pushed earlier on about the Cunliffe Review, yes, which has explicitly, or I thought it explicitly, stated that ownership was kind of off the table. Is she saying by mutuals being a potential outcome, that what is actually off the table is full-scale nationalisation, but that mutualisation, public benefit companies, not-for-profit companies, for example, could seriously be an option via the Cunliffe Review and whatever legislation might follow?
Yes. So we've ruled out nationalisation, but all other forms of ownership are included and in scope of the Cunliffe Review, but not nationalisation. But I do want to stress that in the scenario in which the company was exiting a special administration, it could be going to a company mutual ownership if that organisation in question had sufficient funds, of course, and could ensure that the company or parts of it could continue to properly carry out its activities related to water. Of course, you wouldn't want to, in any situation, transfer to a company incapable of operating and providing water. But it's important to emphasise that it is not... I'll finish this and then, of course, I will. It is important to emphasise that it would not be appropriate for the government to dictate the terms of exit from a SAR, as this would interfere with the conduct of the court-appointed administrator and their statutory objectives.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you very much to the Minister for that very helpful clarification that the Cunliffe Review will facilitate a review of ownership models, including models that the Honourable Member has advocated for. Could the Minister clarify why the government is not permitting the Cunliffe Review to consider full public ownership as one of the options? Why would it not allow for an open assessment of all of the potential options, especially given, as we've heard, that public ownership is so common in countries around the world for what's a natural monopoly?
Thank you. The Commission will focus on reforms that improve the privatised regulatory model. We've already been quite clear that nationalisation of the water sector is not in scope, and the reasons are because of the high costs associated with this option, the lack of evidence that it would lead to improvements, the delays that it would cause in achieving better outcomes for consumers and the environment. And of course, the Commission covers Wales, and that reviews a particular model in Wales where the largest water company operates a not-for-profit dividend model with no shareholders. So in addition, as I have previously noted, the scope of the Independent Commission will include the governance of companies and the operation of existing tools like the Special Administration Regime, and in light of the comments I've made, I hope the Honourable Member can therefore see why the Government will not be accepting this amendment.
Charlie Maynard.
And I thank the Minister very much, and I'm very happy to hear that point about mutual ownership being considered, so very grateful for that. I'm going to take my chances and go back to try and clear up this point, because I'm completely in agreement on the last page which you read out. That no issue with that at all. And I'm going to read it out again. Would the shortfall recovery mechanism be used to compensate financial creditors or shareholders following a SAR? No. Absolutely. We're not. My point here is not remotely about that. I'm not asking about compensating creditors. Page 1, and I'd start again with that first paragraph, is where there's a recovery to be made, yeah, who pays for that? We're not talking about compensating creditors. We're talking about taking money off creditors, not compensating creditors. And rather than take them off the customers, which is exactly what it states in this bullet, which I read out 3 minutes ago, what I am saying is we believe that it should be taken from the creditors, not the customers. So it's not about compensation. I'm surprised that there's a confusion about that. That's not where I'm coming from. It's about the shortfall and who pays for that shortfall. And as stated now twice in the DEFRA explanatory note and in this bullet, which I can read out again as desired, it clearly says the bill payers are going to pay for that. Thank you.
Do you wish to move this to a vote?
We wish to.
Okay. Question is that new clause 28 being read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no.
No.
Division! Lock the doors.
Dan Aldridge. No. Eleanor Donovan.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes. Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkham. Jerome Mayhew. Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey. Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No vote.
Jeff Smith.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes were 10. Unlock! Okay, come to new clause 29, which has already been debated. Is this Tim Farron this time? Okay, I call Tim Farron to move formally.
Thank you. I'm content to withdraw.
Okay. Is everyone content that new clause 29 is withdrawn?
Agreed.
Okay, gone. We now come to new clause 30. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 30.
Thank you. And my first contribution of the day, just to say, I'm sure this is the last session, although we'll see. But just to thank you very much to you, Chair, but also to every other member of the committee. I do think, and it's no fault of any person here, that these committees are something of a charade. I've never met. We had a brief time under the Theresa May government when committees were genuinely balanced, but I've never known a committee accept anything from our opposition, and I'm sure it's not always because the opposition's ideas are bad, but this is just how it works. So we know it's a little bit of a charade. Having said that, 16 or 17 of us have been through the process of looking at this in some detail. That in itself has value. All the same, despite that frustration, which I've had for nearly 20 years, I'm still very grateful to have been in good company of courteous, decent people who have had a robust but very polite debate over the last few days, and I am grateful, especially to the Minister and her team, for their engagement. It's genuinely appreciated. And indeed, for the Conservative front bench and my Green colleague behind me, who've all been very courteous and very, very constructive. I will seek to be brief. So you will, which doesn't always happen, but whether I seek it and whether it happens, let's find out. I simply want to make a comment. So, with regard to new clause 30, we think this is very important. And as we said in the last meeting of the committee, the government has chosen, and we strongly approve of this, by the way, to underpin an awful lot of the scrutiny of the water industry moving forward with the use of volunteers, citizen scientists of the like, and groups like Clean Up the River Kent, the Rivers Trust in Eden and South Lakes, and Save Windermere in my own communities are great examples, and indeed the community around Staveley Parish Council, who've done a great job, and in Burneside in holding United Utilities to account in those places. What they do is of immense value. Underpinning their ability to scrutinise in the future is this very interesting database, which is a live database demonstrating the performance of various water company assets around the country. And we just want to clarify, and indeed to put on the face of the bill, that it should be publicly and freely accessible, that it should indeed be updated in live time, but critically, that it should contain not just current but historic data. I think that's probably the key bit of this new clause, because we are depending, if we're going to depend on volunteers, we can't assume they're going to be on it 24/7. They've got lives to lead. So we must clarify, I would argue, in the bill, on the face of the bill, that this data will be historically available, will be searchable, so that if you blink, you don't miss it. If we're really, I would happily give way, yeah.
Thank you for the honourable member for giving way. Thank you to Dr Huck for your excellent chairmanship and its duty to serve under you today. I think this bill already puts forward a duty for water companies to ensure we produce and publish pollution targets. We've already got within the bill publish a water quality reduction plan. We can also get data fairly straightforward in terms of how the water companies are performing overall. However, what my residents in North West Leicestershire want to know is how their water company is performing week in, week out on the sewage outlets that they are interested in. So I believe we've already got plenty of ways within which we can monitor performance, and I think that this addition is unnecessary.
Very much thank you for your intervention. I think that what we're talking about, though, is a toolkit which is being provided for the voluntary sector, for activists up and down the country, including ourselves, so that, and it's a great addition. This is a good new thing that the government's proposing to do, okay? Examples of why it's necessary. So about 10 months ago, at the Glebe pumping station, water treatment works Windermere, we had a significant deluge of untreated sewage going into the lake, and we only found out because a whistleblower told us. The Environment Agency was notified 13 hours after the incident took place. So the good thing about what the government's proposing here is that there will be a live database. You can see if that's happening there and then, and we can be on it. My question is this: that assumes, unless we write this in, and I'd be happy to accept clarification from the Minister if this is going to happen anyway, but it assumes you have got. So Matt Staniak, who leads Save Windermere, you know, he works every hour God sends, but he is allowed to sleep sometimes. And what happens if he happens at 3 o'clock in the morning and he's tucked up? Do we miss that? I'm simply saying that we should put on the face of the bill that this very good toolkit the government's going to provide, which I commend them for, should be historically searchable so that we can really hold the water companies to account. Ooh, I was just about to sit down, but go on. Yes.
Well, it's just, I'm sympathetic to quite a lot of the intention behind this clause, but as ever, the devil is in the detail. Does he accept that if you look at subclause 22D, that 22D2A, I should just clarify, that the duty to publish the start time, end time and duration of all sewage spill events, that is information which is already there's a duty to publish and has been for some time, because this is referring to the information from the EDMs, which all undertakers have a duty to publish within 60 minutes from memory of an event being triggered. And I'd be grateful if he could give a little bit more detail as to what he has in mind for the authority to publish, because although it does say that it's under 22C, he says it contains such data or information as the authority thinks is necessary. I anticipate where you have such a bland statement like that, it's going to be open to challenge and interpretation with all sorts of committed parties deciding that their inverted commas independently collected and analysed information should be in this database and other people saying it shouldn't. And is this not just a charter for judicial review of the authority?
I'm grateful for the honourable member for his intervention. First of all, we're not going to rehash debates we've had in the committee already, but we're talking about more than just event duration monitoring. We're talking about flow, we're talking about volume, and so I think those things are right to specify. And then, yeah, sure.
Actually, if he looks at the drafting, that may be his intention, but that's not what it says, and that might be a part of the problem with this drafting, is little a is the start time, end time, and duration. It doesn't deal with flow. And that particular subclause is duplication, is it not, with the already legal requirements for publication within 60 minutes.
We dealt with that obviously with other amendments which are not part of the bill, but nevertheless of the suite of things that we have proposed, that would be covered. And fundamentally, all we're asking for is that we would essentially is that the evidence that the information that is put out there, which will be there, will be searchable historically, which cannot be beyond the wit and capability of a very clever IT specialist that exists that are, I'm sure, already working for water companies. We think this is a very important thing because I think this is all part of what we're trying to do in this corner of the committee, which is to take the government at their word when it comes to their elevation, and it's a good elevation, of the role of volunteers and citizen scientists, and equip them to do their job properly and not expect that they will be at their computers 24/7 without sleep.
Database of performance of sewerage undertakers.
The question is that new clause 30 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just very briefly, I promise, returning to our favourite subject, SAR, I think what might be for the best is if we take the conversation out of committee and we sit down with officials and make sure that we're both having the same conversation about the same thing and clarify clarify that. So we'll follow that up, and of course, offer is made to if you wish to join that. So turning to new clause 30, which would require Ofwat to establish a public database on the performance of sewage undertakers, and again I understand and acknowledge the intent behind this clause and share his thanks for all of those environmental campaign groups who have been working in this area to make information available. And it is of course vital that the public are able to access and scrutinise information on water companies' performance. To support this, the government is focusing our efforts on ensuring the most salient information is published in a transparent way and is publicly accessible. This is why clause 3 of this bill already requires water companies to publish information on discharges from emergency overflows in a way that is readily accessible and understandable to the public, and this matches, as mentioned, the pre-existing duty for storm overflows. To support the storm overflow duty, Water UK have published a centralised map of discharge data from all storm overflows operated by English water companies on one website. A similar approach is intended for emergency overflows. We have also requested water companies to begin installing continuous water quality monitors for storm overflows in Price Review 24. This will provide useful information on the impact of sewage discharges on water quality, and we'll be working with water companies to consider how best to publish the information in near real time. This is in additional to the duty to the published information on pollution incidents in Clause 2, as well as existing regulatory requirements for the Environment Agency to publish water company environmental performance data. This data includes the annual environmental performance assessment of the water sector, which provides information on the performance of wastewater treatment works. Information from flow monitors, as we debated previously, is very technical and does not directly relate to the impact of the discharge, unlike continuous water quality monitoring data. We therefore do not think there is sufficient additional value in requiring this data to be published, as the industry is already centralising data on sewage discharges from storm overflows on one website, and given the existing environmental performance reporting, this government does not believe an amendment to require further publications by Ofwat to do the same thing is necessary. I therefore hope the honourable member feels able to withdraw his amendment.
Tim Farron.
Yeah, we're not going to push this to a vote. Thank you.
No. Okay.
Ofwat's a good name.
So
It could be the name of the new regulation.
31 was already debated the other day. So move formally?
Formally, please.
Special administration orders credit ratings.
Question is that new clause 31 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
I remember you said at the time, didn't you? Of the contrary, no.
No.
Is this one going to vote? Division! Lock the doors. I remember you did say 31, but that bit of paper, someone's chucked it. The question is that new clause 31 be read a second time.
Dan Aldridge.
No.
Helen O'Donoghue.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack. Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkham. Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No vote.
Jeb Smith.
No.
The noes were 3. The noes were 10, of course. 10 people on that side. We keep being consistent. The ayes were a mere 3, I'm afraid. Unlock. Right, we now come to new clause 32. I call Charlie Maynard to move new clause 32.
Thank you, Chair. So new clause 32, this is about procurement, and I'm going to read out the key point in this, which is section 2(1). The authority must issue rules requiring undertakers to use competitive procurement processes in respect to procurement relating to water infrastructure. Now, this is kind of, what are we getting at here? There's an unholy trinity that is causing trouble inside our water sector, and I would name them at debt, too much debt, regulatory capital value, that concept is misfiring big time, and the ownership model. And I really hope that this government will be taking on that unholy trinity and finding a stake. Where this is addressing is because of RCV. So RCV is not working in the water sector. And I touched on this yesterday, I won't kind of drag you through it again. But because regulatory capital value encourages to have as big an asset base as possible, there is an incentive on water companies to source product as expensively as possible, to pour really expensive concrete. And this has been going on. It's not your fault. This is what's been going on over the last few decades. I'm not pinning the blame on the government benches here. This is what's been going on, and I'm asking for your help in stopping it. Because if we continue to have faulty procurement processes which encourage water companies to be buying things expensively, it is not in the customer's interests. So what we're trying to do here is highlight this problem and to address it by putting in this amendment. I suspect this amendment won't get passed, but I'm going to be talking about it, and I'm talking about it now, and I will sit down, but that's the issue. And I'm interested to see whether the government recognises that as an issue or doesn't, and is looking to address it. Thank you very much.
Rules about competitive procurement in water infrastructure.
The question is that new clause 32 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for the intention behind new clause 32. And just to say on a personal level, I do welcome the scrutiny and the level of detail that we've gone through. And it's certainly, and I do want to highlight that as this bill started in the previous House, there was a lot of cross-party work, and sort of the government did take on board some of the recommendations accordingly. So I'd push gently back on the idea that this is not a necessary or valid way in which to examine legislation. So the government agrees that competitive procurement can be a successful way to provide better value for money for consumers and greater innovation within major infrastructure projects. In the Price Review 2019, Ofwat developed the Direct Procurement for Customers, or DPC approach, building on a success of the Thames Tideway Tunnel. The DPC allows a water company to competitively tender for services in relation to the delivery of major infrastructure projects. At price review 2024, Ofwat noted that by default, all projects with a total live cost of over 200 million should be delivered through a DPC. And following final determinations in December 24, Ofwat announced that 26 major water company projects would be delivered by competitive tendering processes, including a DPC, with a total whole life costs of almost 50 billion.
Charlie Maynard.
I guess that 200 million, that's a really, really big number. So in my patch in Witney, we've got sewage treatment works as far as the eye can see, which are under capacity, which are leaking sewage all over the place. Bampton, Cassington, Carterton, Witney, Milton, you name it. They're all, it's awful. I'm sure it's the case in all your constituencies too. 200 million is miles higher than any of that spend. Yeah? So all those sewage treatment works, they're going to carry on, effectively not having procurement processes which are inside this new thing because they're below that £200 million threshold. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you. I think the point is that we are introducing, or there has been introduced back in 2019, competitive tendering processes, including looking at where money has been used and how that money can be used most effectively. And as I've just mentioned, that we have got £50 billion worth of competitive processes happening just in the next price review determination. Therefore, water companies are already actively using competitive procurement processes. This is something Ofwat already encourages through the price review process. I hope, therefore, the Honourable Member is content that this amendment is unnecessary.
Tim Farron. Oh, sorry, Charlie Maynard.
Thank you, my honourable friend. We won't put it to a vote, but I'm afraid I would continue to highlight that point. 200 million is too high a benchmark, and we really ought to be dropping that because I think it would serve us all better and our customers better, but we won't be pushing it to a vote. Thank you.
Does anyone object to New Clause 32 being withdrawn? New Clause 32 finally withdrawn. We now come to New Clause 33. I call Charlie Maynard to move New Clause 33.
Thank you. Only 3 to go. Okay, so NC 33. I'm going to highlight the key bits. So 2(1)(a). When participating in a planning consultation or when otherwise providing advice in relation to a planning matter, a water undertaker must provide full and accurate information and an honest assessment in relation to its current and future ability to fulfil its duties under subsection 1. And then I'll go down and highlight 2C. Wherein providing information required on subsection 2A, an undertaker expects not to be able to fulfil its duties under subsections 1 and 2, the undertaker must establish a plan to meet its requirements by a relevant time. What does that mean? It means if you haven't got the sewage treatment work capacity, you commit to having a plan to install that capacity by a relevant time. The relevant time is if you're adding 200 houses or 2,000 houses, your sewage treatment works doesn't have sufficient capacity, then you are saying by the time those houses are occupied, we will have increased capacity by the amount of capacity required, additional capacity. So very kind of common sense situation. And I'm sure you will all have seen, many of you will have been district councillors in your time, I am, is time and time again, you're sitting on a planning committee and guess what? The response from the water utility comes back saying, fine, no problem, hook them up. Yeah, please, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. Is it not the case that the water companies used to have more power to object? They maybe used to have a veto, but the previous government removed that. So they now have to cope with whatever the planning authority decides.
I thank my honourable member for that. I don't know in terms of when that changed. So maybe one of the I'm very happy to be intervened on as to 2015 was it? Okay, right, there we are. So maybe 2015 was when it changed. But obviously I think maybe all of us, maybe most of us recognise that is not a good situation. And what we've got time and time again, I've seen it in Witney, in Ducklington, in Bampton, Aston, in Carterton, where it's just waved through. And when you quiz, in my case, Thames Water about why have you waved this through, it's like, we've got a duty to connect. And they do have a legal duty to connect. But they take that duty seriously. What they take much less seriously is their duty to add capacity to match that increase. Yes, please.
I'm grateful, this is really a request for information and education on my part, but in my conversations with Anglian Water, one of their key asks has been they have this imbalance where they have a legal duty to connect any planning application that's passed, and yet they are not in fact a statutory consultee, so they are not required, they're not able in fact to take part in the planning process, which begs the question of, until you make them a statutory consultee, all of this is irrelevant. Shouldn't his clause be focusing on becoming a statutory consultee? And whilst I'm on my feet, there is a second query that I have on this, on the drafting of this, which is the honourable gentleman gave a definition of what a relevant time is when he was speaking a moment ago, but I don't see that definition in the clause. Is it contained somewhere in the draft legislation? Because if it isn't, it begs the question as to what the effective definition would be.
Thank you. Totally fair point about relevant time, and I, that deserves to be clarified. Fair enough. With regard to statutory consultee, yes, completely agree. No issue with that either. So it would make much more sense, because what we have is a real failure at the moment of doing that. And I'll go a step further. And again, I've lived experience in this one. So I'll give a special shout out for a Thames Water employee, Richard Aylard, who dutifully showed up every 6 weeks for 2 years at West Oxford District Council to really kind of hash through these issues. And I learned a lot from him. And I'm very grateful to him and Jake Morley and Lydia Olszewska, Phil Martin, Lawrence King, Alaric Smith, Alistair Ray, who kind of sat through all that and we all learned together. But what we came out of, and I'm going to say this probably because I think it's important everybody knows this, so when you're calculating sewage treatment works capacity, and they are so under capacity throughout my patch, and I'm sure all your patches, there's 4 criteria, yeah? There is the population, or the population equivalent. That is normally, let's say, optimistically understated. There's the per capita consumption. Sometimes Thames Water has a high per capita consumption when it suits them. Sometimes they have a low per capita consumption when it suits them. So that, again, is understated. Then there's the Environment Agency multiplier, typically 3.0, which is discounted far too often when you have a known record of spills. Then Thames Water is still allowed to discount that EA multiplier, often from 3.0 down to 2.4. That's a 20% cut. That means your capacity can be 20% less. This is a real problem, yeah? And this has been done repeatedly on sewage treatment works which have dumped sewage left, right and centre for years. And the fourth one is infiltration. 47% of West Oxfordshire's big 9 sewage treatment works is from infiltration. That means our pipes are just leaking. And that is, again, frankly, they don't have enough science on it. If we were to put in, guess what, flow meters, we would know this information, but it seems that we're the only team in the room, Adrian, sorry, my honourable friend as well, to actually be advocating flow meters. If we want to solve these problems, we've got to get serious about the information. So please. So, yes. Oh, sorry, somebody got there first.
I thank the honourable member for this amendment, and we'll all recognise the situation he's describing. In East Anglia, planned housing growth over the coming decades outpaces available water resources. And in my constituency, we already have a water resource zone in Hartismere where business operations, planned business growth is being restricted by the water available. Right. So I think that the honourable member is addressing some of the points that are important here in terms of the water companies being able to take responsibility, but they also, isn't it also a matter of having a joined up approach that we actually are needing here, where the planning system needs to be used to address the issues, for example, through things like stricter water efficiency requirements, sustainable drainage systems, housing plans that actually are realistic in terms of natural resources available. Isn't there a problem in just putting the ball in the water company's court rather than having more of a joined up approach?
I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I completely agree. So using West Oxford as an example again, we have installed Grampian conditions, and I encourage everybody else to look into these, where we have said you may not occupy those houses. We couldn't stop the houses being built if there wasn't sufficient capacity, but we could put a Grampian condition in force which says those houses may not be occupied and any buyer knows this, so they won't buy them, so it's flagged to any buyers so that you don't buy a house which you can't occupy until that capacity has been added. And that puts some heat underneath the water companies to actually get on and increase their sewage treatment works capacity. So these are things that I would really encourage the government to be looking into, because we have got vast amounts of housing coming into that's going to be built, and on the current law, they're just going to be steamrolled through, and the capacities are not going to keep up, and that's a real problem for everybody, and it puts more pressure on our rivers. Please. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way, and I have a lot of respect for a lot of the amendments that he has tabled in terms of trying to put pressure on water companies to provide more information at critical stages. And on this side of the House, we've tabled amendments in terms of water companies publishing things on their website to enable citizen science and that sort of thing. So I do respect what he's saying in terms of this. But I guess some of it is in the detail of the wording of this. And I'm sure we are all in agreement that when a water company provides information, paragraph 1A, it talks about it must provide full and accurate information and an honest assessment. And that wording is then repeated later on. I'm sure we're in agreement. We want things to be full and accurate, and we want them to be honest. But I guess the devil is in the detail. How is that going to be judged? If this clause was to come into play, how are people going to judge that? Is an honest assessment, is that whether something is not false or whether it's complete or incomplete? So I think there's an element of challenge that could be put in. So I understand the sentiment, but again, I think the devil is in the detail of the wording as to how this could actually work.
I thank the honourable member for his kind words, and I look forward to some support in some of the votes at some point. In the meantime, if you have recommendations on the wording that you would like to put forward now, please do, because these have been in place. But maybe that's impossible, but that is by all means improve. Thank you.
Responsibility in relation to planning issues.
The question is that new clause 33 be read a second time. Tim Farron.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Brief word from me really on this. And I think this is important, and just to add to the detail that my honourable friend has set out. Essentially, we've got two problems here. One is that water companies are not statutory consultees, and they should be. I take the point that this could be more clearly stated, but it does say when participating more than once, not if participating. But I think the key thing is this, that it is clearly, without wanting to point fingers, but maybe a bit, at water companies in certain parts of the country, including mine, that there is an incentive for a water company when giving its advice to a planning committee, whether it be the national parks, the dales, the lakes, or a local council planning committee, to basically say everything's fine. Because you would, wouldn't you? Because if the water company says, we have no capacity issues, you can build those 200 houses on the edge of Kendal and it won't cause any problems for our sewer capacity, then two things happen, don't they? First of all, the water company is not conceding the need to spend any money on upgrading the sewage network. And the other thing is they're guaranteeing themselves 200 households paying water bills in addition to the ones it already gets. So it's a built-in incentive for maybe not to be dishonest, but not really to give the fullest and broadest assessment of the situation, which is why we think this matters. Yeah, happy to give way.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to give you a practical example of where the absolute opposite has happened in Wales. So in my constituency of Monmouthshire, Welsh Water, because of the phosphate levels in the River Wye, were very clear that we could do no development whatsoever in my area of the constituency, which is Monmouth, for several years because of the phosphates issue. So they absolutely stopped all development and seemingly, very honestly, did that. And now what's happening is now the problems have cleared up somewhat. We are now able to, Monmouthshire County Council have now put forward in the local development plan a plan to build houses, and we have a SUDS regime, which means that absolutely nothing that will be built. By the way, 50% of the homes will be affordable and they will be 100% net zero, which I commend Monmouthshire County Council for putting forward. And so I just want to say that there are examples where the opposite of what you're saying has happened.
So I thank you, Honourable, for her intervention, and I'm sure that's the case, and they're not mutually exclusive. What we really want, I mean, I'm somebody who wants to see houses built. The great frustration in our communities, in the lakes and the dales and just outside, is we desperately need homes that are yet affordable, and we want homes to be zero carbon. And we want to be in a situation where the local community is able to hold developers to account. And the danger is developers who are going to build stuff kind of on the cheap, but not affordable to the potential buyers or renters, are able to kind of get themselves off the hook because the water companies won't really test the resilience of the infrastructure that exists. So both things can happen. And so we feel this is about giving planning authorities the power to say, look, developer, you are seeking to do this. The community as a whole does not have the resilience, does not have the capacity to cope with 200 extra bathrooms. And so what resource is either developer or indeed the water company going to put into making sure that the facilities are upgraded so that this is possible. So this just is about making sure that planning does its job.
Would my own friend give away very briefly?
I haven't sat down. There you go.
Okay, fine, even better. I thank the member for her point, and I think it's an excellent point. And I note that is very interesting, that is a mutually owned water company taking that very sensible decision and approach. And that's just an interesting point in terms of, that highlights, that is the benefit, because they're not trying to make money hand over fist, they're trying to do the right thing. And that's great. Thank you.
That was a bit lively. Okay. Minister.
Thank you. And with your indulgence, just to clarify from the previous debate, just something I didn't mention, and I should have done, that Ofwat does reserve the right to explore the use of DPC for major projects below the £200 million threshold, where it offers value for money for customers. So just wanted to put that on record. And I thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for tabling new clause 33, which would increase the responsibilities of water companies where they participate in the planning process. And again, and I think we all do in this room, I do genuinely recognise the intent behind the clause and where the Honourable Member is trying to get to. We absolutely recognise concerns surrounding water and sewage companies' ability to keep pace with the needs arising from new property developments. However, yes,
David Reid.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship on this last day. This is an active issue across many of our constituencies, and we've heard many personal stories. In my own constituency of Exmouth, the next east, we've had a new town built, Cranbrook. A sewage treatment work was promised and it's not being delivered. This has put pressure on systems elsewhere, and we've seen big sewage outflows in other parts of the constituency. Now, we know that in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, there's big reforms coming for National Planning Policy Framework. So will the Minister please confirm if her department is having active conversations about what we're speaking about and whether or not there will be changes in this space?
Thank you. And conversations are, of course, ongoing, but I wouldn't want to preempt the result of those conversations. And I recognise from the conversations we've had previously that this is a concern for the Honourable Gentleman. However, the Government considers that this particular bill, the Water Special Measures Bill, is not an appropriate vehicle to resolve this issue, which should be addressed through measures such as the Water Resource Management Plans or Drainage and Wastewater Management Planning. And it is our job, as has been mentioned in the debate earlier, as legislators, to make sure that what we draft is the right amendment in the right bill to achieve the aims that we're seeking. Water companies already account for local plan growth forecasts in their water resource management plans. These plans for water provision over a 5-year period will forward look to over 25 years to provide for development outlined. We do recognise the need for stronger and earlier join-up between local planning authorities, regulators and water companies. Work is underway, as mentioned, to consider questions like this and ensure timely and mutual understanding of water resource requirements at the local scale to support sustainable development. This work includes, as mentioned before, the Independent Commission on Water Sector Regulation, which will provide recommendations about the roles and the responsibilities of the water industry regulators that govern the water industry model and strategic planning. As such, it would be premature to legislate in this area today or to impose any additional responsibilities for regulators until the Commission's concluded its review. But I do wish to reassure the honourable members that the Government recognises the need for water companies and local planning authorities to cooperate effectively in considering the water infrastructure requirements which will underpin development plans, housing growth and sustainable development. As such, the proposed amendment is unnecessary. I therefore ask the honourable member to withdraw it.
Charlie Maynard.
We will not be pushing this to a vote. Oh, sorry, apologies. We will be pushing this to a vote. Apologies.
It was one of the two.
It was one of the two. Last day. Sorry, Tim.
3 be read a second time, as many as are of that opinion. Are you going to say the same thing?
They don't know.
You're going to say aye.
Not sure. They'll cancel each other out.
Oh, the contrary, no.
No.
Really?
We have to do this? Yeah, division! Okay, response. Lock the doors.
Dan Aldridge. Helena Dollimore.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Darren Paffy.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
No vote.
David Reed.
No votes.
Jeff Smith.
No.
Same numbers again?
Charlie Maynard. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Aye.
Skullduggery going on here.
Are you sure?
Okay, the ayes were 100% increased too, than they were a minute ago. But the noes were 10. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. We now come to new clause 34. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 34.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chair, for calling me on this issue. We have conferred. You'll all be delighted to hear we have 2 amendments on new clauses to go, and we aren't going to push either of them to a vote. So you'll be delighted to hear that. Well, we may disagree, but I think we're confirmed that is our view. We'll have it. Yeah. So you know, very little to say on this. We kind of have the substance of this debate on Amendment 19. But I think this is significant, all the same, new clause 34. And the point is simply that amongst the things that deeply undermines the confidence of the public in the water companies and the industry in general is the very obvious revolving door between the regulator and indeed the water companies themselves. And just to reiterate some points and to add some other things that were said the other day, the Observer, in their analysis in 2023, found 27 former Ofwat directors, managers and consultants working in the water industry that they had previously regulated, with about half of them... Yeah, happy to do that. Sure.
Thank the honourable member for giving way, and thank you, Chair. I mean, on that point, the honourable member has just mentioned directors, and I think we'd all agree that the strength of this bill is its clarity, but in the amendment, they've chosen to write any individual. Would you agree with me that it's not the catering team, the cleaning staff, the admin people, the accountants and so on are the ones who have sought to kind of swindle customers or flim-flam the taxpayer? It is indeed the directors, and that actually that's where we should be focusing the attention. That vagueness does not add to the bill.
Yeah. He makes an excellent point, and if I was pushing this to a vote, that might make me think twice. But he makes a very good, he makes a perfectly good point. That's not exactly what we are. I think, I'm not the only person who's done this, but I've been at length in this debate, not just during this committee, to make the point that we understand this is quite a heated debate, and it's become at times quite fiery out there in communities and indeed in this place. But the people who work for the water companies, and indeed for the regulators and so on, they're human beings doing a job, and we need to value them. And actually, do you know, that even includes the directors. Having said all of that, it is clearly wrong that you've got directors switching from one to the other. And just to add to that, so we found that the research we did directly found that the Director for Regulatory Strategy at Thames Water had previously been a senior Ofwat employee. He had a senior principal at Ofwat moving directly from Thames, where they'd worked on market development. We also found links between Ofwat and Southern Water, Northumbrian Water, South West Water, especially including directors and those who work on regulation.
Would the Honourable Member give that?
Yeah, go on, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's a serious point about regulatory capture, and I think it's just something that we probably should talk about cross-industry, cross-sector. There is something that we could do constructively across the House around looking at regulatory capture. We're talking a lot at the moment about artificial intelligence and the growth of the tech industries, and regulatory capture is something we need to be implementing stuff now. So any lessons that we do learn around regulatory capture when it comes to the water industry, we should be implementing across other industries, and I think this is something that we can come together as when it comes to the whole House, hopefully.
I'm really grateful to Donald for what is a really well-informed and thoughtful intervention, and he's absolutely right. That is what we should be doing. I will reflect on, just to be reasonable, that you kind of want people working for regulators that understand the industry. So we understand why there could be a benign reason, if you like. Nevertheless, we do trace very much some of the reluctance within the culture of Ofwat towards taking action. I talked about the £168 million worth of fines still not collected from 3 transgressing water companies by Ofwat. But some of the reluctance comes from, I don't think it is corruption, I think it's coziness. And that is something that we need to make sure we address, which is what this new clause seeks to address. We dealt with this at Amendment 19 earlier. We did push this to a vote, so I don't want to trouble you again, and I will happy to withdraw the amendment.
Principles of best regulatory practice.
The question is that new clause 34 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you all for your contributions. And now I'll address new clause 34 as tabled by the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. And again, I do want to stress we recognise the intent behind this amendment. However, it would be disproportionate, as highlighted, to prevent all water company employees from being able to accept employment in Ofwat. Ofwat very seriously consider the handling of actual and potential conflicts of interest. Staff in Ofwat are bound by the Civil Service Business Appointment Rules, which doesn't apply obviously to every agency that it does in terms of Ofwat, and by the duty of confidentiality in the Official Secrets Act. Any new employees in Ofwat, regardless of their previous employment, would be bound by these rules. Compliance is mandatory, and any breach may result in disciplinary action being taken. Individuals with experience working within the water sector do have the wealth and knowledge, and I know the Honourable Gentleman mentioned that, which may be a valuable asset to Ofwat and support better policy making. I hope this reassures the Honourable Member's concern of the potential conflicts of interest with Ofwat, and that this amendment, as drafted, is therefore unnecessary.
Tim Farron.
I'm content to withdraw, as I say. Thanks, Jeff.
Does anyone object to the penultimate clause? Clause 34 being withdrawn. Okay, new clause 34 by me withdrawn. New clause 35. I call Tim Farron. Oh, sorry, in fact, Charlie Maynard to move new clause 35.
Thank you, Chair. So this one is a big one. Title, companies be placed in special measures for missing pollution targets. So I'll read out the key bits. So under Part B, 2DZA, for the purpose of ensuring that the functions of water and sewage undertakings are properly carried out, the authority must establish annual and rolling 5-year average pollution targets which must be met by water and sewage undertakers, and the penalties be imposed for failure to meet such targets. The 5-year average, obviously we have wet year and dry years. You can't just have kind of flat numbers. It's got to take an average, clearly. Then F. A timetable produced under subsection 2DZAB must require the following reductions in the duration of sewage spill events, using the annual total hours duration of all sewage spill events recorded by event duration monitors based on average from the last 5 years as a baseline, and then 25% reduction within 5 years, 60% reduction within 10 years, 85% within 15 years, and a 99% reduction within 20 years. Now, what are we trying to get at here? So, Clause 2 in here talks about pollution incident reduction plans. That's about a specific event, yeah? So that's at a very small micro level. We've got a national problem, and we need to be thinking about things at a national level. And we have got a lot of data already, and I think it was Peter Drucker who said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So what we've been advocating is to measure it, and we've had that debate. But the good news is that we already have one metric of measurement, which is event duration monitors, which give us how many hours per year of sewage are spilt. Now, it's not perfect, long way from perfect in two respects. One is we don't know the volumes going out. We don't know how much of that is actually sewage. So there's that aspect, which we've discussed at length. And the other thing is that, frankly, a lot of these EDMs, and I give a shout out to Professor Peter Hammond, who's highlighted this and sent you all messages about it, is those EDMs are subpar in many cases. But that is still the best data set we have, and I think we should all take the view that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So, yes, we would advocate that as soon as we have flow meters put in, which I know that the government benches don't support, but as soon as we have flow monitors put in, and as soon as we have quality monitors put in, we could use that as a metric, but we don't have that now. But we do have EDM data now, and so what I'm advocating is that we use that metric to, we've got how many hours are spilt by operator already, we take the 5-year average, and then we start setting out targets. And businesses like knowing where they stand. So what we are doing here, and you know, I'm a naive politician who's only 6 months in, so I really don't know. There's an awful lot I don't know, and I've probably committed a key kind of error here, which is I've actually put some numbers. And so some smart politician come along, oh, that's an incredibly generous number. You should, you know, will go lower than that. Fine. If somebody wants to play that game, I don't really care. What I want is I want our rivers fixed, and we get our rivers fixed by setting those targets. Telling the water companies that we want them to hit those targets and giving them sticks and possibly carrots to hit them. And we are missing an opportunity, and frankly I feel respectfully that this water bill we've missed a lot of opportunities. This bill, we didn't have to have this bill now, we do have this bill now. I think we ought to be going for the wins now that and every single amendment has been turned down, regardless of which party has put it forward. And that, I think, is a loss for our rivers as much as for the individuals in the room. However, with this one, we have an opportunity to set some targets, and I encourage, whether that's today, and this amendment will almost certainly fail because we won't be pushing it to the vote, or the future, I really encourage the government to be taking the metric that you have, which is hours spilt, and setting benchmarks to take these water companies against and match them against, set those out clearly, set them out some bad news and some good news if they miss them, and let's hit them, and then we are seriously getting closer to fixing our rivers. Without those, we're not. Thank you very much. And may I say, I would also echo my friend in terms of I've really enjoyed most of the 3 days we've been in here, and I really appreciate the courtesy and generosity in the answers, and thank you, Chair, for chairing us, and thank you, the clerks team, who've been so helpful as well, and the DEFRA team. Thank you.
Happens to be placed in special measures for missing pollution targets.
The question is that the final new clause 35 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to also thank, as I have before, all the environmental groups and activists up and down the country who do so much to champion clean rivers, lakes and seas for us all. And I look forward to seeing you all in report stage and for third reading as well, to continue it. And I do, just as I did before, just gently push back. The government did work collectively and cross-party with other parties in the other house, and did therefore come to compromise amendments before the bill came here. So I think it would be slightly disingenuous to imply that the government has not accepted or worked with other parties on this. But I thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale again for suggesting new clause 35. We must ensure that companies accelerate action to reduce pollution to the environment, halting the unacceptable harm they have caused in recent decades. Indeed, that is why we have introduced a new requirement for water companies to produce annual pollution incident reduction plans and the accompanying implementation reports through this bill. And again, just gently note that the implementation reports and the strengthening of that amendment was done cross-party in the other place. These plans will need to set out the actions that water companies intend to take to reduce pollution incidents and an assessment of the impact these actions will have. Companies must then report on the progress they have made with measures they committed to in the previous year and must clearly explain the reasons for any failures to implement their plans and set out the steps they are taking to avoid similar failures in the future. In addition to these new requirements which increase accountability for pollution incidents, the government is committed to acting as fast as possible to reduce sewage pollution in our waterways and upholding stringent performance criteria for water companies as evidenced by the significant forthcoming programme of investment in PR24. A delivery programme of this scale, improving thousands of storm overflows with billions of pounds of investment, requires clear and robust regulation. The proposed new clause as drafted would unfortunately undermine this. The government's storm overflows discharge reduction plan sets stretching time-bound targets to eliminate ecological harm from all storm overflows by 2050 and for water companies to significantly reduce harmful pathogens from storm overflows discharging to bathing waters by 2035. This is supported by an ambitious backstop target. By 2050, no storm overflow will be permitted to spill more than 10 times per year on average. These are stretching targets informed by detailed analysis and extensive engagement. They will drive £60 billion of investment between 25 and 50, the largest infrastructure programme in water company history. I'll finish and then, because I might cover, but I will let you intervene on me again. Almost £12 billion of that investment will begin this year, improving over 2,800 storm overflows by 2930. These targets bolster underpinning legislative requirements to limit pollution from storm overflows. The Environment Agency monitors and enforces against breaches of environmental requirements, utilising monitoring data to support their investigations. Where breaches are identified, they have significant powers to ensure enforcement orders, financial penalties, and where appropriate, to pursue criminal prosecution. The measures in this bill will further strengthen their powers, including by introducing automatic penalties. I give way.
Charlie Maynard.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. These timelines are too slow. So 2035 for monitor installation, that is at a much slower rate than what has been going on over the last 7 years. And that is disappointing. 2045 and 2050 targets, these are too far away. We don't need to be moving this slow. We shouldn't be moving this slowly. We must do better. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had this debate and conversation which led to the first of the fact sheets that we produced for this committee stage. And this was about, I think you talked about the installation and the speed in which we're installing, and we highlighted that we're in course going at double the rates that the previous government was tending to go at. And we have highlighted as well, to improve some of these, it obviously involves engineering and it involves work. And that is why that we think in the £12 billion of investment, we are improving. And just to mention, again, 2,800 storm overflows by 2930. So for the next few years, there will be improvements worth £12 billion of investment. Of course, where there's opportunities to go quicker, of course we all want that. And everybody would want everything to be done quickly. And there's always a balance between making as a government, making promises you can't keep, which I never think is the best way to go, but also being stretching and ambitious. And I feel like we're being stretching and ambitious while also making sure we're not making promises we can't keep. But obviously, if there's a way to go faster and more quickly, then of course everybody would want and accept that. The Environment Agency is also currently consulting on proposals to add new spill frequency thresholds to storm overflow permits. This will maintain the performance of storm overflows that have undergone improvements and make it easier for the Environment Agency to act quickly if storm overflow performance deteriorates. Ofwat sets specific performance targets for water companies in the 5-yearly price review. Ofwat is expanding these performance commitments for Price Review 24 to include an ambitious storm overflow spill reduction target, which, if achieved, would see average spill per storm overflow reducing by 45% by 2029 compared to the 2021 levels across the industry. Where these commitments are not met, companies must reimburse customers, holding water companies to account to deliver outcomes. So while appreciating... Yes, yes.
Charlie
sorry, but spill per overflow, again, I think we're drinking the water industry's Kool-Aid. We're doing their metrics, and that is not doing anybody any favours, because spill per overflow, what we should be talking about is how many hours. We have that information. Why aren't we saying how many hours the spill? So let's think about it. You could have a spill for 1 hour, or you could have a spill for a month. That's just one in that metric. That's missing a huge amount of what's going on here. Please, can we move away from these metrics towards spill hours at a minimum? Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I recognise the intent behind the comments that the Honourable Gentleman is achieving, and whichever way we want to address this or talk about it or set targets. I think ultimately what we certainly want to see from a government is less sewage going into our rivers, lakes and seas. And if we can find a way to all agree on the best way to move that forward, I think that's something we can unite behind. So, while appreciating the intent, as I've mentioned, the government cannot accept this clause, but I do recognise the intent behind it. It would cut across the existing targets I have set out, creating confusion and uncertainty on which water targets the company should be meeting. This risks undermining the extensive forward investment programme already underway, which is essential to delivering the changes that I know we all want to see. So for these reasons, and for the last time, I ask the Honourable Member to withdraw his amendment.
Charlie Maynard.
We will not be pushing this to a vote. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Does anyone object to new clause 35 being withdrawn? Thought not. New clause 65 by leave withdrawn. So the final question I must put is that I do report this bill as amended, and there were some government amendments at the beginning that made it.
Yeah.
So I do report this bill as amended to the House, and at this juncture, anyone who wants to say anything is allowed to.
Thank you.
Neil Hudson.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hook, and it's a great pleasure again to be serving under your chairship today. Can I, first of all, do on behalf of the opposition and hopefully from colleagues across the House, just a vote of thanks to everyone involved with this process. Yeah. And I've got a list here, and please shout out if I'm missing anyone out. But can I first of all thank the chairs, Dr. Hook and Mr. Vickers, for guiding us through this process. Can I thank all the Bill Committee staff, the clerks and officials for your assiduous, thorough work that keeps us on message as members of Parliament scrutinising this legislation. Thank you for that. Chair, thank you. I'll use the word you for you. Can I thank the DEFRA officials for all their hard work with this and for engaging with the opposition as well, and I very much appreciate the Minister allowing the officials to do that. Can I thank the doorkeepers and Hansard as well? So I don't think I've missed anyone else in the room except the public, and that gives me the chance to thank the members of the public who've come in and watched our proceedings, but also people who've watched from afar online. And as the Minister said, the stakeholders, the environmental groups, the volunteers, the experts who have fed into this particular bill and this water debate that we are having, and are helping legislators across the House improve and refine legislation. So thank you very much, Chair, on your behalf, to thank the public as well. This has been a very interesting few days that we have had, and I think it has shown us that in terms of what we are trying to do to improve our water quality, there is a lot of cross-party consensus. There is some disagreement about how we best do it, but I think this committee has shown the House that actually there's a lot of agreement about that there's a scale of a problem and we need to address that. I respectfully say I'm disappointed with the comments from the third-party spokesperson talking about this being a charade, the Bill Committee stage. I have to say that line-by-line scrutiny of bills I do not think is a charade. And yes, there is a democratic process in terms of how the committees are populated. But, Madam Chair, that is democracy. And I would have thought that particular party, with the title of their party, that they would respect results of elections, and that's how democracy works. We've seen they've had some disagreement amongst themselves about some of their votes as well, but anyway, I'll leave that point. But there is we've also had some interesting discussions, and again, and I'd be remiss not to talk about teeth. Just at the very end, to say that actually we've had dental analogies plenty with that, and we're wanting to give more teeth to the various regulators from there. And I think finally, I think I did detect the minister say, and we'll have to go back and check Hansard, I think she used the word off-wet, which I think is an interesting term when they're going into their commission. That would be an interesting term for a new body that might be set up, off-wet. But I'll leave that with the minister.
Any more for any more? Tim Farron.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dr Hook, and also in his absence, Mr Vickers, for brilliantly chairing the 5 sessions we've had of this committee. I won't list the whole group of people that the Honourable Member for Epping Forest has, but just to endorse what he has said, the clerks, the DEFRA officials, the Minister's team, colleagues on all sides of the House, for the courtesy and for the seriousness with which they've engaged with the opposition, with indeed members of the public who've been to view the committee in person and those who followed it from afar. There's no doubt that the voluntary sector, that the public, have been ahead of politicians on this for many, many years. I'd argue that the UK leaving the European Union was a key moment. It was a key moment because we had to go back and look under the bonnet and see what was already accepted and what was already permitted. We could argue as to whether the previous government gave us regulations and standards that were as good as what we had before we left the European Union. That also might be an additional issue, but nonetheless we're in a position where the likes of Surfers Against Sewage, where Windrush against sewage pollution, Save Windermere, the Clean Up the River Kent campaign, and so many others in all of our communities have led the debate on this and created great scrutiny, which is why we strongly approve of a significant part of the government's ethos through this bill, which is to put an awful lot of power in the hands of those who care so much and are around our communities. I don't mean to offend people by referring to this as a charade, but the reality is that even we spent 5 years in government. I'm pretty confident the government that I was a part of never allowed a single opposition amendment at a bill stage. And so that there is a little bit of a pretense of this. All the same, it's an enjoyable pretense. And it is one in which we've gone through, I think we have gone through it line by line, and we all understand the bill better, and it means that there's, a dozen and a half of us introduced into the Commons in a few days' time, the report stage, who can speak with greater awareness than we did beforehand. We support this bill. If anybody was to call a division on it, we would go into the eye lobby. Our frustration is that we feel that this is an opportunity the government has missed. Their answer is obviously, here comes the Cunliffe Review and we'll see what happens next. Of course, aren't we going to get an undertaking that there will be another bill in the next King's Speech? If there is, that's exciting, that's interesting, and that would potentially answer many of our concerns. But the issues to do with being much clearer about limiting bonuses, about recognising that one of the fundamental problems with the water industry is the fragmentation and the weakness of regulation, that the financials are clearly all wrong, unfair and wasteful, that we're looking at duration but not volume, not content, not impact, that we're not supporting the citizens who are behind the citizen science enough by giving them the information, the resource, and indeed the place on the water company boards that they need. So there are many, many areas where we think this bill could be so much better, and we don't need to wait for Sir John in order to do those things. Having said that, what's wrong with this bill is what's not in it, not what is in it, and we therefore are happy to support it and grateful very much for the constructive nature of the debates we've had throughout this, for which I'm very grateful.
In that case, for the last tearful final time, Minister Emma Harding.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Chair for your wonderful chairwomanship, and to everybody on the committee. It's been a new experience, I think, for so many of us looking around here. New experience in new positions coming this time, and new members appearing on the committee for the first time. So it's been a really enjoyable, and I have to say, very camaraderie, very sort of, very pleasant. And where there's been disagreements, they've been done in a polite and courteous manner. And I think we set a wonderful example, Chair, I think, for many of the other debates around that, and long may it continue. I'd also like to thank, obviously, the incredible Bill Committee here, who have done such an amazing job in supporting me in my work through all of this. I've got to thank the Whip for making sure that we all vote in the right way at the right time, which definitely not getting me into trouble on my leading my first bill has always been very important. And of course, as mentioned, everybody, we've had loads of written evidence for this, and for a small bill, we've had lots of amendments. This shows the strength of feeling and the interest in this bill that there is out there in the wider community. But what can I say, Chair, other than this, we've only just begun, and you ain't seen nothing yet. Because we've got, following this bill, which is obviously just part of our phased transition to transform the water sector in its whole, we've also got the Cunliffe Review, and we'll be back. In the words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back here with another bill, similar time, same place. Hope to see many of you there as we go again to clear up our rivers, lakes and seas for good.
The question is that I do report the bill as amended to the House. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. This committee has concluded its work. Order.
Thank you.